Welcome to the community of practice on autism spectrum disorder and other developmental disabilities. We're talking about taking care of our complex bodies. We have a panel of people that are going to talk to us about sleep issues and autism and developmental disabilities. So I'd like y'all to just take a brief moment and introduce yourselves. I'm going to go around the I'm going to use my screen because I'm very egocentric today. So it's going to go in my order. Sherry, would you care to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sherry Schultz. I'm a nurse at the Waisman Center WIN program. So I work with kids through adults living in the community, kind of around health issues, kind of focusing on wellness. And I'm also parenting a kiddo who is on the spectrum.
Thank you, James.
My name is James Williams. I am an autistic self-advocate who has lived with gut and sleep issues. But one thing that I want to remind people is that my issues have just as much been social and cultural as they are physical. And one of my biggest passions is focusing on the social and cultural elements of things like sleep, along with the physical issues, but to focus more on the cultural issues because, quite frankly, there are plenty of credentialed physicians and researchers that are far more qualified to talk about physical sleep issues than I am. But what I am able to do is tell you about the struggles I had socially and culturally dealing with sleep issues.
Thanks, James. And Barbara, welcome.
Good morning. My name is Barbara Meyer. I am a parent to 3 autistic children who have struggled with sleep for many, many years. And so that's kind of my insight into this of things that we've done that have helped.
Thank you, Barbara. And Scott, welcome.
I'm glad to be here. Scott Allen. I am a mental health counselor on the autism spectrum, who works mainly with autistic adults. And I have had sleep issues for certainly since becoming a teenager. My parents would sleep before that. I don't really clearly remember it before then, but it's certainly been a feature of my entire life, essentially.
Thanks, Scott. Who would like to start off with just sort of some of the things that we see in sleep issues with people with disabilities or autism? What are some of the issues that we're talking about here?
Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Was I speaking at this one?
Oh my gosh, yes, you are, Marcia. I just did not. I lost you. Marcia,
Not in
go
your
ahead.
realm. That's okay.
I'm going to try to find you
I'm on
again.
the other screen.
Right, I'm trying to pin you and I've lost you.
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead, Marcia.
Okay, and I've switched to my computer so I can manage easier on my
Okay.
phone. All right, so I'm Dr. Marcia Dewey, and I'm here in 2 forms. One, as a provider, I'm an audiologist, and I work at Frederick Hospital, and I specialize in working with people who have tinnitus, which are sounds inside of them, and also sound sensitivity issues. And then on the other end, I'm also a parent of someone on the spectrum, a teenager, and as a provider, my patients often, especially with tinnitus, have a lot of sleep disruption. So sleep disruption is something that I came to more as a provider, and that's what I'm here to share.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. The whole switching of computers threw me. So I'm glad that you're back. Who wants to start with just telling us a little bit about what are we talking about with sleep issues? What are some of the things that are going on with our kiddos with autism or our adults with autism where sleep is concerned?
I can start. So I think oftentimes the issues that are brought forward for my services have a lot to do with sleep that's kind of disorganized or disrupted. So people are falling asleep and then they are waking up, or their days and their nights are, confused. I think there is a lot of issues with individuals being able to fall asleep initially. It can take many, many, many hours. So by the time they're falling to sleep, especially for our kids, they're only a few hours from needing to get back up and start their day because, school, work has normal 8 to 5 normal hours. I think there is lots of concerns with kind of movements and activities during sleep that can cause safety issues. So if someone's getting up sleepwalking or, having night terrors where they're waking everyone up in the house, that can be really concerning. And then there is also the kind of medical concerns that can affect sleep, like sleep apnea, or someone who has restless legs, or kind of their circadian rhythm, the night and days, confusion. So those are kind of the main things that I have seen or that are requested our services for.
Okay, I can go next. So one thing as a parent is that I found with sleep was that our son was on medication. And I think we see a lot of comorbidities with autism. So ADHD tends to come along. And my son was on medications that, basically those, I forget the name of them, but, speed, it gets them going, so it wakes up their brain. And it's counter to falling asleep. So I know oftentimes people are taking a medication to kind of get them going and, focus in the day. And then sometimes they're getting medications to wind down and go to sleep at night. And so that very much is, I think, involved as well with sleep issues. And I kind of come from this from more of a mind-body perspective because for my son, as he was growing and learning, what worked best for them, we really adopted a very how do we honor him as a person and his authenticity and allow him to be who he is rather than trying to have him look like or be something different. And that also carries over into my work with my patients as well. It's just sort of honoring a person as a wholeness, their physical, mental, and emotional parts. And so I think that sleep as well, from my perspective, is there's a lot of the looking at our nervous system of, are we in more of a sympathetic nervous system, the autonomic nervous system branch of sympathetic, which looks more like fight, flight, activation, go, 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 versus the more parasympathetic, which would look, what's also called rest, digest. And so in order to be asleep, we have to be shifting that nervous system. So if we are taking medications that ramp that up, or as a person who is neurodiverse and the world is kind of a scary place and activates us, we tend to be more over here. And we really need to feel safe and calm and sort of shift over. So some of the tools that I work with is how do we actually go to our body, bring our body down and shift into that part of the nervous system. So from my perspective, that's a couple things.
Thanks, Marcia. Barbara, could you explain your experience?
Yes. In many ways, things are a little bit more difficult for me as I don't have autism. I think the more I learn about myself, the more I learn I believe I am ADHD. But I have my 3 children are essentially nonverbal. One can speak, but they just repeat back what you say to them. I mean, getting to the root of anything is extremely difficult. And my household has for years survived on someone's up at 2:30, put them back to bed. Someone's up at 2:40, put that one back to bed, and we just did this for years of putting different children back to bed, or the whole house was up. And, we tried some different medications and there was some help from that. But I mean, there was never really the solution. And for us, the solution has begun because my oldest has aged out of the school. So now, and I hate to use the word trauma, but I'm going to use it here. He has spent his entire 21 years of life nonverbal, people not understanding him, in the fight or flight. And so I've really focused since last May of very few demands on him. Very, very few. And I'm seeing his central nervous system calming down, calming down. And it is such a joy to sleep past 4 a.m. in the morning. I mean, I can't explain how wonderful that is after just so many years of not having it. So I think medications can work for some people. And we did supplements, we did, all these different things. But I really think that getting to that fight or flight, the internal, is really helping. And frankly, it allowed us to add on a new medication to help with some other issues that he has had. And between the medication and I think him getting better sleep, his life has improved phenomenally. And it's going to allow us to potentially try another adult day program, because the last one we were asked to leave. And, we understand why. And so there's no fault whatsoever in that. It wasn't a fit for him and it wasn't a fit for them. But getting the sleep focused on, adjusted, is just helping with so many different areas. And it's helping the other two sleep longer because he's not waking up his brothers. So I think that for many people, sleep is so very, very important. And if you don't have it, your foundation is just in the basement, crumbling. You can't build on it.
Thank you, Barbara. Scott, would you like to share a little bit about what your experience has been with sleep?
So I have two things to say. First, our democracy is being overthrown as we speak, and I will not pretend that things are okay. If we don't come together to stop this now, autistic Americans will lose all hope of being treated as human beings. We will be treated as unprofitable parasites. So second, on behalf of all the autistic people who do not have a say in these matters, I'm going to be silent for the rest of this panel.
And I know there's going to be plenty of people in the chat that are in agreement with you, sir. So what are some other things about sleep that we can discuss?
I think one thing I want to piggyback on what was mentioned is the fact that a lot of times one of the biggest struggles in education for autistic people is not academics or social things. The fact that their sleep needs are just incompatible with the schedule of school. And I think of the fact that, yes, for many of these kids, that is very traumatic. And I think of the fact that one of the reasons why I had to make a difficult decision that I was going to end my education after high school was because I myself realized that physically, after finishing high school, I dealt with a lot of harm having to wake up early to go to school. And my body's like, yeah, you can go to college, but do you really want to continue that harm on yourself? And there didn't seem like to be a sufficient benefit. I didn't know if I was even going to get a job in what I studied for. I had so many friends who I went to college with autism who then were told, sorry, you're not welcome in the job you studied for because you can't perform the essential functions due to your autism. So I had to make a difficult decision that when I was in high school, although I worked hard and got good grades, that was it. I'm not going to college because my body's not going to be able to handle 4 more years of having to deal with the structured sleep of school that it really was being harmed with. Plus, there was also the concept of money. At least in high school, unless you're going to a private high school, you're not paying tuition to be there. Why am I going to pay a chunk of money to go somewhere where I have to harm myself physically to function? Or even have my parents pay for that?
So I would just say, Barbara, I just want to say thank you, and James as well, for bringing that word trauma in here, because this is very real, and we often think of trauma as the kind of classic big T traumas of assault and abuse and things, and living in war, but also what's called little t, and I don't particularly prefer that terminology because I think all trauma is trauma, but it really is, I think it's Peter Levine that says, trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. And I think that's very relevant when we talk about people who are on the spectrum, because their experience, we all have our own different experiences of the world, each of us, whether we're on the spectrum or not. But when you're neurodivergent, it is that experience is more different, less typical, and things that might seem just innocuous can be traumatic, can be traumatizing. And one thing I wanted to bring up here, and James, you made me remember this, is the sleep schedule, right? That we think that it's 8 hours and it's from 10 to 6. And, my son's school starts at 7:20. And I'm like, we're not doing that. We're just not going to do it. It's not going to happen. He's going to show up at 8:30. So, and also just being that advocate of saying that's just not how it's going to work. And, there's a lot of pushback of like, well, when he gets a job, he's going to have to. And it's like, no, he doesn't. There are jobs where you don't have to get up at the crack of dawn. There are second shifts. I usually don't get to work till 9. That's just me. We sleep in our house. We like it. I love sleep. I think it's a beautiful thing. I enjoy it when I'm in bed. I'm like, this is the best. I get to go to sleep and it's just so great. And I think that, we should honor that. And you're right, our society, and actually some of the things that we know about sleep are that we used to be biphasic sleepers. We would sleep in 2 sections. So we'd sleep for about 4 hours and then we would wake. And then people would get up and do stuff. They would do some activities or get ready for the next day, and then they would go back to sleep. So the sleep was really like 7, 8 hours over maybe a 10-hour period. But our culture is so go, go, go. Let's just shove that all together because I got stuff to do. And, I mostly see adults, but I occasionally see younger. And I had a younger person, and the mom was like, she wakes up in the middle of the night and she gets up and she does this. And I explained to her, this is natural for a lot of people, and, roll with it. And, again, people are working and getting up early. It's hard to do that. But I have a lot of patients who are retired and they're like, I'm struggling and I wake up and I can't fall back to sleep. And I say, then get up and do something quiet. Go do your Sudoku, do a jigsaw, pack your lunch, fold the laundry, put away the dishes, write something, listen to a podcast, and then when you're sleepy, after an hour or 2, go back to bed. So if you don't have to get up. So that thinking outside the box a bit. And I think our culture is just it has to be this way. And I've learned as a parent, like, no, it doesn't. And as a human, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. And you get a lot of pushback. But it is, and you have to, and you don't. So really understanding how we work as humans in our sleep cycle too, is that we have REM sleep, and then there's stage 1, 2, 3, 4, with 4 being the deepest sleep. And we actually go to REM sleep every 90 minutes. So it's actually totally natural for us to wake through the night, especially when we get to those REM sleeps. The beginning of sleep is the deeper sleep, REM briefly back to the deep sleep. And then that second cycle, we're in REM a little longer. And then the second half of the sleep cycle, we're in REM a lot. So that's where our bladder's full, we're going to wake up. If we're laying in our arm funny, we're going to wake up. If we have tinnitus, that's what I see, they're going to wake up. So, so it's natural to wake and to just sort of honor what our body's doing. And one of the things is there's a lot of, it's so dangerous. You have to sleep. And there's so much sleep anxiety. And I have people who come in with, there's like, when do you start thinking about going to sleep? 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon starts that whole cycle. If I'm not going to get to sleep and I need to get to sleep and things like this. And so, so there's a lot of pieces to this where that anxiety comes in and you have to fit the mold, you have to get up and we have to get you to school. Then I'm waking you up. I mean, I never woke my son up. Yeah, I just let him sleep. We had that flexibility. Everybody doesn't have that, but if he was sleeping, he would sleep. And if he woke up, then he'd wake up. So I've never set an alarm for him. And when he has to sleep longer because he couldn't get to sleep. So, but you're right, if you have to get to work or you have to get to school, and having that flexibility, and again, going to that intuition for yourself of like, what works for me, what works for my child, and then to the establishment or whatever, no, we're not going to do it. Like, this just isn't going to work for us. And again, you're going to get a lot of that pushback, which is hard, but And I'll stop there and let someone else speak.
Yeah, I know that at one point, my son was taking a nap at school. And that was fine in those early elementary years, but all of a sudden it was like, well, this is ridiculous. He needs to stay up. He doesn't need the nap. And they found behaviorally that, yeah, he does need the nap. And, you know, over time, he was taking less naps. And I think they just allowed him more of those little cat naps where he would put his head down on the desk and just kind of doze for a few seconds. Because, and it was one of the ways he would try to get out of doing any work, is he can take a cat nap anywhere, anytime, no matter 200, 300 kids in the gym watching the state basketball tournament, and my son is sleeping on a beanbag. So he can sleep anywhere. So I understand that they weren't certain if it was avoidance behavior or he really did need the nap. But it is the trauma of being misunderstood for so many years, being nonverbal, trying to explain that to people, of how frustrated do you get when you're at the airport and you find out your flight has changed and now your whole schedule is thrown off. I go, you can see people exploding all over the place in public when their routine and something they expect to happen isn't happening, but we expect these children or autistic individuals, whether children or adults, to just take every punch that's thrown at them and roll with it. And they are constantly having things thrown at them and being changed. And, you know, it's a very hard thing. Just trying to educate people that I understand you're not trying to cause trauma to my child, but you are. And so it's this very delicate tap dance of not alienating the people who are trying to help your child and educating them at the same time.
And protecting your child.
Yes, and protecting my child. And so I just feel like for so many years with the sleep that, to be very truthful, last week, there were 2 nights in a row where my kids were up at a little after midnight. I spent the next 4 days not being able to sleep because my body was waiting for them to wake up and me having to reset the household and get everyone back to bed. And now the past night or so, I've been able to sleep through the night. So, I mean, disruptive sleep affects the entire household. And it's almost as if for parents of children with autism, that we just hear, yeah, that's just a part of it. And there's not a whole lot of discussion on how we can solve it. And then therefore, we're not helping our children to achieve that more calm inner self to be able to sleep. And I don't have the answer on how to do that. That's why I'm here.
So kind of piggybacking onto that is one thing that's helpful that we can do to give us some of that information about what is the person's sleep cycle. You know, maybe it's not normal, but it's normal for them, is sleep tracking. I think some very, very interesting patterns can be seen. And oftentimes it can help us show others that what's seen as like, this isn't a good sleep pattern, this isn't a functional sleep pattern, is for that person. And it's really consistent until the rest of us try to go in and make it a normal sleep routine with school or work. I think, Barbara, your comment that, you know, we can change things to make that person's sleep pattern is, again, I think overlooked a lot of the time to be able to do it. Yeah, so tracking is really good. The other part that I know whenever we say anyone has a sleep issue, it always brings up hygiene. Let's bring up hygiene, you know, get them to sleep on time, turn the lights off, turn the music off. Again, I think that overlooks that sometimes individuals with autism or on the spectrum have different needs than everyone else. I mean, I've had physicians who are adamant they need to take all the devices away from them 2 hours before bed so they'll sleep. And I will kind of counter that with we're taking their voice away because they communicate through that device. And, you know, how would you like to be told for 2 hours before bed you're not allowed to talk, and then go in and expect to fall right asleep? So I think, you know, tracking is good, but again, making sure that the individuals, you know, the parts that make them them are considered in the kind of troubleshooting with it.
I'm gonna just comment on that because I completely agree. I do talk to my patients about sleep hygiene, and I'll just be curious, like, what's your sleep routine like? And sometimes there's some obvious things that need to be adjusted. And I'm talking about a lot of not necessarily people on the spectrum. So so I do look at those things, but I also will say, you know, I fall asleep with the TV on, and I always say, it's not broken, don't fix it. You know, if that's working for you, why would I tell you to? That's not the thing. That's the problem. You know, if they're falling asleep okay, I'm not going to fix that, you know? So I think you're right. Some people can watch screens. If I feel like the person's saying, well, I watch the news and it's crazy every day and it amps me up and I watch the 10 o'clock news and then I go to bed and I lay there thinking about it. Well, maybe that is something we can set aside, right? I think one thing that is universal is we all, you know, we all are humans with nervous systems, you know, and one of our nervous systems is the autonomic nervous system that goes to fight or flight or goes to rest, digest. And so I think that is a really good tool to kind of focus in on is, you know, we use this term of meditation, but I think anything that calms the body, anything that we can stop and focus on the body. And again, this is not accessible to everybody, and it may not feel comfortable. Like I'm very clear with when I work with people is we have to work with what works for you, because every body is different. And I mean the body and the nervous system, we're all different. Whether you're on the spectrum or not, you know, that we have to tap into what works for you. Some people, deep breathing works well. Other people, you know, that may be activating for them. So it's not a universal thing. So I always give choices: body scans, deep breathing, box breathing, meditation, yoga, progressive muscle relaxation, autogenic relaxation. There's all different kinds, and we have to find out what works for that person. Sleep stories, you know, those were good when my son was small, just listening to something, sitting with them. Maybe we have to sit with them. So back to outside of that social norms of, you know, we're told to make our baby sleep separate from us, but an infant on its own, a human infant is the most vulnerable creature on the earth, the most vulnerable animal. We cannot be independent until we are like a decade and a half or 2 decades. So to leave a human infant on its own, it feels like death to them. So, you know, I fortunately didn't have that mindset when my son was little. He did sleep separate from us, but if I were to go back, I'd actually probably co-sleep with him. But I would stay in his room with him a lot. I would stay in his room. I'd have my hand on his back till he fell asleep. I'd wait till he fell asleep. And, you know, we do get shamed as parents for that. There's a lot of shaming around that. You shouldn't do that. He's never going to be able to sleep by himself. And I just want to share, I read a Facebook post once where a mom was saying, you know, we co-slept. And everybody would say, your son's never going to leave your bed. He's never going to get out of your room. And she told this beautiful story about when he was like 15 and he came in her room and he laid in bed with her and he was like, I had a really bad day and this happened and my girlfriend broke up with me. And she's like, yeah, so he still comes to my bed. That's beautiful, right? So I thinking outside that box, not letting the society tell us, you know, you shouldn't let your 15-year-old son climb in your bed. You know, if he's laying here and and my son would always open up at night as soon as the lights go down, even still. This is the time that he has my full presence. There's no TV. It's just us. The lights are off. That's when everything comes out. So we have to follow those patterns too and honor them. And then also, Barbara, the demand avoidance. And I think you said something else, like there is a spectrum of autism. It's not recognized here, but it is in the UK, the pathological demand avoidance. I think my son has that as well. And to me, it's like, well, why are they avoiding the thing? Because it's hard. And to say, well, you're just avoiding this thing. Yes, we all do that. We all avoid things. Like that's the human trait. So there are things that are specific to autism, but we can also be like, that's a human quality. Why are we acting like none of us do that? Like I avoid stuff too, because it's hard, because it overwhelms me, because I'm not in a place where I can deal with it. You know, honor that. He's telling you something. And if he can't speak it, then you really, really need to pay attention to his behaviors. Anyway, I'm going off track, but all of that. So I
When
think
you
that,
do, and when
yeah.
you do that, you see the sparkle has come back to him. I feel like he trusted and loved us, of course. But I feel like that love and trust is deeper now that he is just at home, that everything is calming down within him. And it's just opening up a whole new avenue for him and for us to communicate. He's using his talker a bit more than before, because I think the talker, again, using the trauma word, always use your talker. And sometimes he wasn't able to with the dyspraxia to indicate what he wanted to communicate. Yeah, you got a talker. It doesn't mean it works every single time in every single communication. So yeah, I think really, really it's hard and to figure it all out. I just feel like I've been in the science lab for the past 21 and a half years, and I hate math and science.
Like being on the
Oh.
front lines.
Yes.
Right. And Heidi mentioned they didn't give us a manual for this either. No one tells you that you got to be an investigator and a scientist and a tracker and notice the little changes and the subtle changes. Is there so much there? I do want to remind people that we're at a time in our panel that if you have questions on sleep issues, feel free to put them into the chat. Feel free to electronically raise your hand. You can do that in the menu bar at the bottom of the screen, and I will recognize you if you have questions or comments for the panel. That would be fantastic. James, we haven't heard much from you. Do you have anything that you'd like to add on sleep?
Absolutely. When I was a baby, my mother would always tell me how I just wouldn't sleep at night, but would sleep a lot during the day, which then later confirmed that gene that I inherited from a part of my family that reflected my grandfather's behaviors in old age. And one of the things we realize is that, as a child, as an adult, we culturally condition ourselves to engage in sleep patterns that might not be what our body wants. But of course, when you're a baby, you're not going to be engaging in that conditioning. And my parents didn't realize back then that tendency wasn't because I was trying to annoy them when they wanted to sleep, but that was ideally what my body actually needed. However, I actually made the choice, even though I decided not to go to college, that there are things I really want to do that are going to happen during the day, and I've had to voluntarily engage in sleep patterns that are detrimental to my body because of something I want to do. And I think we have to remember this, that a lot of times in adulthood, when you have more freedom in your schedule, there's going to come a time when you want to do something so badly, you may actually do something detrimental to your sleep cycle because that desire is greater than that need. I call this mind over matter. But I think we also have to remember that, fighting for the human need for sleep is just as much a social thing as it is a physical thing. I think about how growing up, my eyes were opened about a social side of sleep when I became good friends with a girl with autism in high school, and we didn't go to the same school. We actually met at an autism event. And she actually went to a private autism high school that gave her some of the best services she could have, better than the public high schools in her area. And here's how this story relates to sleep. She went to a high school at that high school, she was only one of 2 girls with autism there. But she didn't feel left out. She didn't feel like that was an issue because she became good friends with the autistic boys there, and her parents, wanting to make sure that she wasn't deprived of an adolescence because she was at this school, taught her about the need of sleep, but a very unique way. She said that her parents said, because you're in a great school, I'm going to give you the same social freedoms with those boys that most girls take for granted with other girls. And she made a point to allow her to have sleepovers with those boys and said, look, sleep's a human need. I'm going to give you permission to allow these boys over to your home for sleepovers to teach you that that you are honoring a human need, and don't ruin it by the behaviors that every other parent thinks you're going to do as a teenager. Respect the need and just enjoy each other's company. And I went over to her house for many sleepovers in high school, and guess what? We slept and didn't engage in any of the behaviors that so many parents thought we were going to do together, because we realized that sleep was a human need, and a sleepover should be about sleep and fighting for the right to have a sleepover with a friend that actually cares about you, whether or not they're your gender.
My son's best friend is a girl, and we've had sleepovers. They've been friends since she was born and he was 2, and we've had sleepovers for years.
Getting ready to wind down this panel. So if you care to, it's a great time for some final thoughts that you want people to remember about sleep and autism and developmental disabilities. Barbara, you want to go first? Not just say no. Come back to me, Tim. I would totally understand.
I wish as a parent, I know that I got to look forward because there's more coming than when I look backwards. But there are times I still look back and go, if I had known, I would have done blank. Everybody does it regardless of if autism touches your life or not. I wish that I would have put more focus on how my child might be feeling instead of worrying about taking away the screen time, trying the melatonin, trying all these other outside external things. Maybe we would have licked the sleep issue sooner. But I did the best I could with the skills that I had at the time. And so we're just moving forward with it, and it's just another block to my basement foundation for my children. And so I think if anyone out there is struggling with thinking I should have done more, you did what you could with the information you had at the time. That's all.
Thank you. Who else would like to make a closing statement here?
I completely agree with that. And I think one of the most important things too, although this is not related to fully to sleep, I just wanted to make a quick response to some of the stuff that Scott wrote about what's going on in the world. And I just want to say, ultimately, one thing I have learned is that you have to keep an open mind about the possibility that something that you don't give a second thought about, whether it's sort of sleep or gut issues, some bodily function that you don't give a second thought about, some intervention that might help you or even help other people might be harming an autistic person you care about. And I think of the fact that when I go to medical autism conferences where I see research that shows just how often something that has helped so many people can be harmful to an autistic person. And the key thing here is that the harm is due to autistic differences that have no connection to whether or not the intervention caused the autism or was related. What I keep an open mind to is the possibility of Someone is born with autism, and something that helps neurotypical people can harm that autistic person. And we need to focus more on this possibility. And I want to keep an open mind to that possibility. And I don't want to trigger anybody, but I just want to say this. There is a hypothesis I have been exposed to at medical autism conferences that I keep an open mind to, and that is, I meet doctors who, like every reputable person should, understand the disproven link about vaccines causing autism. But what they also talk about is a theory I don't see talked about a lot, that due to dysregulations in autistic bodies, some autistic people, not all autistic people, may have a potential adverse reaction to a vaccination. And the theory that what people mistook for vaccines causing autism is in fact possibly an autistic person having a bad reaction to a vaccination. And the approach that I do respect is when a doctor says, look, some autistic people may have bad reactions to vaccinations, and we need to, and we should possibly medically exempt them and teach the public, hey, if somebody has a bad reaction to a vaccination, that doesn't mean the vaccine's dangerous. It doesn't mean it's not saving lives. But if we medically exempt people who have bona fide reasons to not be vaccinated, we can make sure you're not scared to vaccinate your child, get rid of that fear, and help you understand your child doesn't have that issue. And I've seen that objective be silenced and ignored when ultimately that is what I support. And I will end my rant.
Thank you, James. You're always welcome to rant. That's one of the things that I like about this group is we know we all don't have the answers, but man, I love the conversations. Sherry.
I guess kind of the takeaway for sleep, and that I always try to point out to families, is trying to gather some information, trying to track it a little bit, and then talking through, is what the information showing you really a problem? Is it something that you need to work to address? Or is it just something, again, that's part of the uniqueness of your child or the individual you're working with? And then if it is a problem, reaching out to the medical teams to see what the options are for helping with it. I think we report that there's sleep problems and we start on the road to medical intervention, that when we look back, maybe the problem ended up being some of that medical intervention that we did to address the problem. That's just their uniqueness.
I love y'all are speaking my language on the uniqueness, and everybody deserves to be treated and listened to for who they are, for how their mind works, how their body works. It is not going to be the same as anybody else. We are totally unique individuals. We may share some things in our common humanity, but I react in a different way than anybody else will react. My body is entirely different. My makeup is entirely different. So let's continue that investigation that Barbara was talking about, and let's continue to learn. Marcia, last thoughts before we go.
Yes. So one of the things I was just thinking about was we have been saying this word trauma, and we've also been saying, people who are on the spectrum. But I think, again, back to that humanity is just even traumatized people also have, even if they're not on the spectrum. So it is that kind of pulling back, and what is our shared humanity? What makes us more similar than different? How do we honor people? So even outside of the spectrum, but I just think making those connections of, it's not just people on the spectrum, but other people experience these things too. And so even those of us who aren't on the spectrum can see our own differences and preferences and say, oh, I can understand that. And so that was something that really kind of jumped out to me that I made a note of. I think that's it. I think everybody's kind of said a lot of the main points, but I appreciate everybody here. It's been a very good conversation.
And I've become aware that the feedback link that I very generously put into the chat is not working. So I put another link in there that hopefully will work. Something happened between my email and the chat. So it happened. So yeah, so hopefully the new link works. Let me work on the certificate. If not, you can always let us know if you need a certificate of attendance. We will take care of that. But now, hang on one second. I just want to, well, first of all, I want to thank the panelists for everything, for the thoughts, the feels, the passion. We need that. Keep on what you're doing. I really appreciate each of you. As I go through, and I appreciate you so much that I'm now going to unpin you. I hope it doesn't hurt. And I'm going to also just stop the recording.